The planet of Vela had always been quiet. The Illyrians, tall and graceful beings with soft blue skin and bright golden eyes, lived in harmony with their world. Their villages were filled with music, their fields with crops, and their skies with colorful gliders that danced in the air like birds. For centuries, peace had been their way of life. But peace could not last forever, not in a galaxy where empires rose and fell with greed. The war came suddenly. First, the stars above their world filled with enemy ships, dark metal giants that hovered in orbit, their cannons pointing down like the eyes of predators. Then came the firestorms, bombardments that shook the earth, reduced entire cities to rubble, and turned rivers into boiling floods. The Illyrians ran, they hid, they cried out for help to the galaxy that had promised friendship, but no help came. The Council, the great circle of species that claimed to protect the weak, sent only words. "We will deliberate," they said. "We will decide." The Trade Alliance, who had once bought Illyrian goods and praised their honesty, closed their borders and turned their faces away. Even the neighboring systems, who had sung songs of unity, now stayed silent. The Illyrians waited. They waited for fleets that never came, for friends who never arrived, for hope that slowly died. In the ruins of the capital city, once a shining beacon of glass towers and crystal bridges, survivors huddled in the underground shelters. Food was scarce. Disease spread in the damp air. Children cried in hunger, and their parents had no comfort to give. Some Illyrians began to whisper that perhaps their species was already lost, that their voices would fade into history like so many others. Among these survivors was Siral, a young Illyrian teacher. She remembered when her classroom was filled with laughter, when her students painted stars on their walls and dreamed of exploring the galaxy. Now those children sat in the dark, too weak to even speak. Siral walked among them with a torch in her hand, whispering stories of better times, trying to keep their spirits alive. But inside, her heart was breaking. One night, as the air shook with another bombardment, Siral raised her face to the cracked ceiling and whispered, "Why has no one come? Why has no one saved us?" Her voice was weak, but her question echoed in the silence of the shelter. No one answered. Days passed. Weeks passed. The enemy ships never left the sky. They tightened their grip, cutting off supplies and blocking every escape. Illyrian fighters tried to resist, but their weapons were too few, their technology too old. Hope was dying. Then one evening, something strange happened. Instead of enemy fire, there was silence. The people of the shelter stepped outside cautiously, expecting another storm. But above the sky, the blockade was no longer quiet, it was burning. Ships, small but fast, darted between the giant enemy cruisers. Beams of light flashed, explosions lit the heavens, and for the first time in months, the Illyrians saw the enemy retreating. At first, they thought it must be the Council. Who else would dare? But then, as the largest of the small ships descended through the clouds, its hull scarred and its engines burning, the people saw a symbol they did not recognize, a simple circle with a star at its center. The ship landed roughly, throwing dust and sparks into the air. Its ramp lowered and figures walked out. They were not Illyrians. They were not from any of the great powers. They were shorter, stockier, their skin a variety of shades from pale to deep brown. Their eyes carried both exhaustion and fire. They wore armor not polished and perfect, but scratched and patched. They carried rifles built for function, not beauty. And yet they walked with purpose, with determination. With something the Illyrians had almost forgotten. They walked with hope. The first to step forward was a woman in a heavy coat. Her hair tied back, her face streaked with smoke. She looked at the Illyrians and spoke in a language they did not know. Then she raised her hand and opened a box filled with packets of food. She placed it gently on the ground, stepped back and nodded. Siral, trembling, walked forward. She picked up one of the packets and opened it. Inside was a simple bar of pressed grains. She handed it to one of the children, who bit into it with desperate hunger. Tears filled Siral's eyes. She looked back at the strangers and whispered, "Who are you?" The woman seemed to understand, for she pointed at herself and said a single word. "Human." The word spread quickly among the Illyrians. Human. They had heard of this young species, newcomers to the stars. The Council had called them reckless, emotional, unrefined. The Trade Alliance had mocked their lack of wealth. Other empires had dismissed them as temporary. But here they were, standing where no one else dared to stand. Over the next days, more human ships arrived. Small freighters, troop transports, and medical craft. They were not strong compared to the great fleets, yet they fought bravely, forming shields around supply drops and guiding Illyrian survivors to safer ground. Human medics tended to wounds, their hands gentle even as the ground shook around them. Soldiers shared their rations, even though their supplies were thin. Engineers repaired Illyrian shelters using scrap metal and creativity that amazed the locals. For the first time in many months, children laughed again. Not because the danger was gone, but because the humans smiled with them, played with them, and reminded them that life was still worth holding on to. Siral watched these humans closely. She saw how they mourned their dead but still pressed on. She saw how they argued among themselves yet stood together when danger came. Most of all, she saw how they treated Illyrians, not as burdens, not as strangers, but as equals, as family. One evening, as the humans distributed water, Siral approached the woman she had first seen. She had learned her name now, Captain Reyes. Siral looked into her tired eyes and asked, "Why did you come? The others left us. Why would you risk everything for us?" Captain Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "Because we remember what it feels like to be left alone, and we won't let it happen to anyone else." Those words stayed in Siral's heart. For the first time since the war began, she believed that perhaps her people might survive. Perhaps the galaxy had not abandoned them after all. And so, on the ruined world of Vela, hope was reborn, not because of the powerful, not because of the rich, but because of the humans. After the humans' arrival changed everything on Vela. For months the Illyrians had lived in fear, waiting for each bombardment, waiting for death. But now there was movement, there was energy, and there was life again. The humans did not promise miracles, but they acted with courage every single day. That was more than the Council or the Alliance had ever given. Captain Reyes and her team worked quickly. They set up makeshift shelters from broken stone and steel, using whatever they could find. Human medics, though few in number, treated Illyrian wounds with steady hands. Soldiers built watchtowers from scrap metal, their eyes always on the horizon. They even trained Illyrian volunteers in how to defend themselves, handing them simple weapons and teaching them how to stand their ground. Siral, the Illyrian teacher, joined the training not because she was strong, but because she wanted to protect the children she cared for. The humans respected her courage. They never treated her as weak. Instead, they showed her how to fire a rifle, how to build barricades, and how to move quietly in the shadows. For the first time in her life, Siral felt not just like a teacher, but also like a protector. The Illyrians began to see the humans in a new way. At first they had thought these newcomers reckless, strange, and emotional. But now they saw their fire. They saw that humans did not run from danger, even when outnumbered. They saw that humans could turn despair into laughter, and fear into determination. One night, as the stars glowed faintly through the smoke-filled sky, Siral sat near the campfire with Captain Reyes. Around them, Illyrians and humans shared stories, passing food from hand to hand. A human soldier strummed a small stringed instrument, filling the air with gentle music. For a moment, the war felt far away. Siral turned to Reyes and asked, "Why are you still here? The enemy is too strong. Your ships are too few. You could leave and no one would blame you." Reyes looked into the fire, her face marked with exhaustion. "Because leaving would mean we are no different from the others. We came because no one else would. And now that we're here, we will not abandon you." The words touched Siral deeply. She realized that the humans were not here for glory or power or riches. They were here because they understood pain. They were here because they knew what it meant to be forgotten. The following days tested this promise. The enemy, angered by the humans' interference, sent larger ships to crush the resistance. The ground shook as walkers, towering machines of steel, marched across the plains. Their cannons tore apart buildings, forcing survivors to flee again. Yet the humans stood their ground. They laid mines, set traps, and used clever tricks to turn every street and every alley into a battlefield. The Illyrians fought beside them. At first their hands shook, unused to the weight of weapons. But with the humans by their side, they grew braver. Farmers, artists, and teachers all became defenders. They learned to fight not for conquest, but for survival, for their children, for their homes. Siral stood on the barricades one morning, her rifle trembling in her hands. An enemy walker thundered toward them, its cannons glowing. She was terrified. But beside her stood a human soldier named Mason. his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder and said, "Breathe. Aim. Trust yourself." Together, they fired. Their shot struck a fuel line exposed by earlier damage. The walker exploded in flames, collapsing in the street. The barricade held. Cheers rose from Illyrians and humans alike. In that moment, Sorrel felt her fear turn into courage. The battle raged for days. Supplies ran low. The humans shared everything they had, even cutting their own rations to feed Illyrian children. The Illyrians saw this and wept, not from sadness but from gratitude. Never before had an outsider given so much without asking for payment. At night, when the stars were hidden behind clouds of smoke, the campfires still burned. Humans and Illyrians sat together, telling stories, singing songs, and reminding each other that life was more than war. Children laughed again, not because the danger was gone, but because they felt safe in the humans' presence. One evening, Captain Reyes gathered the Illyrians. Her face was tired, her armor scratched, but her voice was firm. The enemy will not stop. They will send more ships, more soldiers, more fire. We cannot win with strength alone, but we can win with will. We must hold on until the galaxy sees what is happening here. They may have ignored you before, but they cannot ignore forever the sight of a world that refuses to die. Her words spread like fire. The Illyrians, once broken, now stood tall. They swore to fight, not only for survival, but also to show the galaxy that they would not be erased. The enemy attacked again, this time with overwhelming numbers. The skies burned, the ground shook, and the barricades cracked. Sorrel fought beside Mason, Reyes, and others, her heart pounding but her spirit unbroken. She saw humans fall, wounded and tired, yet refusing to retreat. She saw Illyrians lifting each other, refusing to surrender. In one fierce clash, Sorrel pulled a wounded human medic to safety, shielding him with her own body. "We fight together," she told him. The medic smiled weakly, whispering, "That's what makes us strong." As the night ended, the defenders still stood, bruised, battered, and bloodied, but alive. Against all odds, they had stopped the enemy again. In the quiet after the battle, Sorrel looked at the ruins around her. She thought of the Council, of the Alliance, of all the powerful empires that had turned away. And then she looked at the humans, tired but smiling, helping Illyrian children back into shelter. She realized that these humans, considered reckless and weak by others, carried more strength in their hearts than all the fleets of the galaxy. The Illyrians no longer felt abandoned. They no longer felt alone. They had found allies who would not leave, who would not forget, who would fight until the very end. And deep inside Sorrel's heart, hope burned brighter than ever before. The war on Vela dragged on. Weeks turned into months, and still the enemy did not give up. They sent more ships, more machines, more soldiers, determined to erase the Illyrians from the galaxy. Yet every time they attacked, they met resistance. Not only from Illyrians, but also from the stubborn humans who refused to leave. The humans were not many. Their ships were small, their weapons worn, and their supplies thin. But they had something that the great powers had forgotten: determination. They did not measure battles by numbers or wealth. They measured by spirit, by will, by the choice to stand even when everything seemed lost. Sorrel watched this spirit every day. She saw Captain Reyes leading from the front, her coat torn and her eyes heavy with fatigue, but her voice always steady. She saw Mason, the soldier who had taught her to fight, laugh even in the middle of danger, as if courage itself was a kind of shield. She saw human medics working through the night to save lives, refusing to rest while others still suffered. The Illyrians changed because of them. Once they had been a gentle people broken by betrayal. Now they were stronger. Farmers had become defenders. Artists had become messengers of hope. Teachers like Sorrel had become protectors. And through it all, the humans fought beside them, shoulder to shoulder as equals. One evening, the sky filled with fire again. Enemy ships rained destruction on the surface. Walkers marched across the plains, their massive legs shaking the ground. The defenders gathered at the edge of the ruined city, ready for what might be their final stand. Captain Reyes stood before them. Her armor was scorched, her hands trembling from exhaustion, but her eyes burned with unyielding fire. She spoke in a loud, clear voice, every word carrying across the rubble. "Listen to me. The enemy thinks this world is broken. They think you are weak. They think no one will stand for you, but they are wrong. Look around you, Illyrians and humans fighting together. This is strength they will never understand. We do not fight for power. We fight for each other, and that is why we cannot be defeated. A roar rose from the defenders. Illyrians lifted their rifles. Humans slammed their fists against their armor, and together they prepared to hold the line. The battle that followed was the fiercest of all. The enemy pressed forward with everything they had. Explosions tore through the city. The barricades shook and fell. But every street became a trap. Humans and Illyrians fought side by side, striking from shadows, ambushing enemy machines and refusing to retreat. Saral fought with a calm focus she had never known before. Each time she felt fear, she remembered Mason's words. Breathe, aim, trust yourself. She did, and she held the line. Around her, Illyrians who had once despaired now fought with courage, their voices rising in unity with the humans. The enemy pushed closer, but they could not break the defenders' spirit. In one desperate moment, when an enemy walker crushed through the barricade, Captain Reyes herself climbed its legs, carrying explosives strapped to her back. The machine shook, trying to throw her off, but she held on. With one final cry, she planted the charge, leapt away, and the walker exploded in flames. The defenders cheered as the burning wreck collapsed. The battle raged for hours. The defenders were tired, bleeding, but they never gave up. Then at last the enemy line began to falter. Their machines fell, their soldiers retreated, and their ships pulled back into the sky. The defenders had done the impossible. They had held. When silence finally came, the ruins of the city were filled with exhausted cheers. Humans and Illyrians embraced each other, tears on their faces. They had survived. Against all odds, they had survived. Word of the victory spread quickly beyond Vela. Across the galaxy, whispers began. Whispers of how the Illyrians, abandoned by the great powers, had been saved by the youngest species of all. Whispers of how humans, mocked as reckless and weak, had stood where others would not. The whispers grew into stories, and the stories grew into shame for the Council and the Alliance. The Illyrians rebuilt slowly. With human engineers, they cleared rubble and rebuilt homes. With human medics, they cured diseases that had spread in the shelters. With human teachers, they taught their children not only knowledge, but also courage. Saral often walked among the children. She told them stories of the battles, not to glorify war, but to remind them of hope. She told them of Mason's laughter, of Reyes's courage, of the humans who had shared their last rations, who had stood beside them when all others turned away. She told them one truth again and again. When no one else came, the humans did. A monument was built in the center of the ruined capital. It was simple, a stone pillar carved with both Illyrian and human hands. On its surface were words in both languages. When no one came, humanity stood. Beneath it were the names of those who had fallen, Illyrian and human alike, etched together as one. Years later, the monument still stood. Children placed flowers at its base, families whispered prayers of thanks, and travelers from across the galaxy came to see it, to remember the day when humanity showed the galaxy what it truly meant to stand for others. The Council, shamed by their silence, tried to rewrite history. They tried to say they had always meant to help, but the Illyrians did not forget. They knew who had saved them. They knew who had shared their hunger, their pain, and their hope. Saral grew older, but she continued to teach. She sat before her students, Illyrian and human alike, and she told them the story. Not of empires or wealth, but of courage, kindness, and loyalty. She told them of the night when humanity lit a fire in the darkness, and in every heart that heard the story, something changed. Respect grew. Admiration grew. Trust grew. For the galaxy had many powerful species, but it had only one humanity. In the end, the Illyrians survived not because of promises, not because of wealth, but because a young, stubborn, emotional species chose to fight for them. And that choice changed the galaxy forever. When no one came to save them, the humans did.